Sarah slid a tray of delicate pastries into the gleaming oven, her practiced eye catching the faintest hint of golden brown on their crusts. The kitchen buzzed around her, a symphony of clanging pots, sizzling pans, and the soft murmur of her colleagues communicating over the din. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, flour dusting her cheeks, a small smile playing on her lips. Cooking was more than a job. It was her sanctuary. "Looking good, Sarah," Chef Martinez called out, giving her a thumbs up from across the stainless steel counters crowded with today's ingredients. "Thanks, Chef," she replied, her voice lifting over the clatter. She felt at home here in the upscale restaurant's kitchen, where every spice and simmer meant something special. After years in the culinary industry, Sarah still felt a rush every time she plated a dessert, each dish a testament to her dedication and love for the art of cooking. Her shift was demanding, requiring precision and patience, but it was a life she had chosen and adored. By the time the clock struck 10, the dinner rush had tapered off, and Sarah began cleaning her station, her thoughts drifting to Tom, her husband, who'd be waiting at home, likely asleep on the couch with the TV still on. Tom, a gentleman with a quiet demeanour, worked as an accountant in a large firm downtown. They had met during a culinary workshop Sarah had hosted. He had attended, not out of interest in cooking, but to accompany his sister who couldn't make it at the last minute. His awkwardness with a chef's knife had been endearing, and her heart had warmed to him instantly. Their life together was comfortable, settled, filled with small joys and shared responsibilities. Their marriage, though mostly filled with love and mutual respect, had its challenges. Tom's new boss, Mr. Daniels, a charismatic and assertive figure, had taken a keen interest in Tom, often requiring him to work late hours. Sarah respected Tom's dedication, but couldn't help feeling sidelined, missing the quiet dinners and weekend getaways they used to enjoy. As she locked up her station, Sarah's thoughts lingered on the upcoming weekend. Tom had mentioned that Mr. Daniels would be coming over for dinner. He had seemed anxious, probably worried about impressing his boss. Sarah planned to make her signature coq au vin, a dish she hoped would impress. Little did she know this dinner would stir more than just culinary admiration. She finished up, hung her apron, and headed out into the cool night. The streets were quiet, the soft hum of the city a stark contrast to the cacophony of the kitchen. She smiled to herself, thinking of the surprise she had planned for Tom's birthday next week. Life was good, predictable and safe, or so she thought. As she turned the key in her front door, unaware of the challenges that lay ahead, her mind was filled with recipes and a quiet contentment, the kind only found after a day spent doing what one loves most. Tom had often spoken about his boss, Mr. Daniels, a man whose presence seemed to fill any room he entered. Sarah imagined him tall and imposing, a stark contrast to Tom's more reserved nature. When Tom mentioned that Mr. Daniels would be coming over for dinner, she felt a flutter of nerves. It was an opportunity for Tom to shine, and she wanted everything to be perfect. The day of the dinner arrived, and Sarah spent hours in the kitchen. Her hands moved with practiced ease, chopping, searing, and simmering, but her mind raced with anticipation. What would Mr. Daniels be like? Would her food meet his expectations? As she set the table, placing each fork and knife with precision, she heard the doorbell ring. Tom greeted Mr. Daniels with a nervous smile and led him into the kitchen. "Sarah, this is Mr. Daniels," Tom said, gesturing to the man behind him. Mr. Daniels was indeed an imposing figure, his tall frame and deep voice dominating the small kitchen. "It smells wonderful in here, Sarah. Tom tells me you're quite the chef," Mr. Daniels said, his eyes scanning the pots and pans on the stove. Sarah smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. I hope you enjoy everything. Dinner will be ready shortly." As the evening progressed, Sarah noticed Mr. Daniels watching her. His gaze lingered a little too long, his compliments straddling the line between polite and personal. "You must have a real passion for cooking," he remarked as he took a sip of wine, his eyes fixed on her. "It shows in your food and the way you move around the kitchen." Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Was he being friendly, or was there something more in his tone? She glanced at Tom, who seemed oblivious, caught up in his desire to impress his boss. Mr. Daniels continued, "A woman who can cook like this is a rare find, Tom. You're a lucky man." Tom laughed, missing the undercurrent in his boss's words. "I know I am. Sarah's the best." As the night drew to a close, Mr. Daniels stood to leave. He leaned in, his breath slightly tinged with wine, and whispered, "Thank you for the meal, Sarah. It was truly exceptional. We should do this again, just you and me. I'd love to see what else you can whip up." Sarah stiffened. The suggestion was inappropriate, and she knew it. She pulled back, offering a polite smile. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. We're glad you enjoyed everything." After he left, Sarah cleaned up, her mind replaying Mr. Daniels's words. They echoed in her head, a warning bell she couldn't ignore. She felt uneasy, torn between mentioning the incident to Tom and keeping it to herself to avoid causing trouble at his job. That night, as she lay beside Tom in bed, the weight of Mr. Daniels's intentions pressed down on her, a harbinger of complications in their otherwise serene life. In the weeks following the dinner, Mr. Daniels found reasons to visit the restaurant more frequently. Each time he made it a point to compliment Sarah on her culinary skills, his words always brushing the line of professionalism. "You really must show me how you get this sauce so perfect, Sarah. It's like you've got magic in your hands," he'd say, his smile lingering a touch too long. Sarah, for her part, appreciated recognition for her work, but she couldn't shake off the discomfort that accompanied his attentions. She found herself looking forward to yet dreading his visits, a confusing duality that gnawed at her. When he was around, she noticed his eyes tracing her movements around the kitchen, his comments more personal each time. "That apron really brings out the blue in your eyes. It's my new favourite colour," he remarked on one such visit, his tone casual yet charged with an unspoken implication. Their conversations often veered into their mutual appreciation for art, a safer common ground. Mr. Daniels spoke of his visits to art galleries and his love for modern impressionism. Sarah found herself engaging, her passion for Renaissance art making her more animated. These discussions were a respite from the brewing storm, a momentary return to innocence. However, as Mr. Daniels grew more comfortable, his boundaries blurred further. He began stopping by the kitchen, specifically when he knew she'd be finishing her shift. "Just checking if you've left any culinary masterpieces for me today," he'd joke, his presence increasingly bold. One evening, as she plated a particularly complex dessert, Mr. Daniels leaned closer than usual, his hand brushing hers under the guise of admiring her technique. "You truly are an artist, Sarah. Not just with your dishes, but in all you do," he whispered, his voice a soft murmur that contrasted sharply with the clatter of the busy kitchen. Sarah froze, her heart thudding loudly in her chest. This wasn't just friendly praise, it was an admission veiled in admiration, crossing a line she had silently drawn. She pulled her hand back, subtly, her smile polite, yet distant. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels. I just try to do my best," she responded, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. That night, as she lay in bed, the incident replayed in her mind. Was she overreacting? Was his behaviour just friendly interest, or was there an underlying intention she was meant to decipher? The thought of discussing it with Tom made her stomach churn. She imagined his hurt, the possible strain on his career, and decided against it. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and with it a growing wariness that she carried back to the kitchen each day. Sarah had always considered the kitchen her realm, a place where the chaos of clanking pans and the rhythmic chopping of knives brought a sense of peace and control. But that sense of sanctuary was shattered the evening of the catering event for the city's local art gallery, an event Mr. Daniels had insisted be catered by her restaurant, specifically requesting her skills. The evening had begun like any other, with Sarah overseeing the final preparations of hors d'oeuvres and making sure each plate was a testament to her culinary passion. Mr. Daniels arrived early, as he often did, mingling with guests, but always keeping a watchful eye on Sarah. As the event wound down, the staff began to clear the venue, and Sarah started her clean-up routine in the now quiet kitchen. That's when Mr. Daniels appeared at the kitchen doorway, his frame filling the space, a glass of wine in his hand. "Sarah, I must say, the food was spectacular tonight," he started, his voice smooth, a smile on his face. His presence wasn't unusual, but the timing felt off, with the kitchen empty except for the two of them. "Thank you, Mr. Daniels, I'm glad everyone enjoyed it," Sarah replied, focusing on wiping down the counter, hoping her disinterest would be a cue for him to leave. Instead, he stepped closer, setting his wineglass down on the counter with a soft clink. "You know, Sarah, it's not just the guests who are impressed. I've been watching you handle your kitchen, your art. It's mesmerizing." His tone had dropped to a more intimate timbre, and he edged closer, his proximity encroaching on her personal space. Sarah felt a prickly heat climb up her neck, her discomfort mounting. "I appreciate that, Mr. Daniels, but I really need to finish up here," she said, her voice firm yet polite, hoping to keep the interaction professional. Ignoring her hints, Mr. Daniels reached out, his hand brushing against hers under the pretense of examining a dessert knife. "Such precision, such grace," he murmured, his touch lingering far longer than necessary. "You must show me your techniques one day, maybe some private lessons." The suggestion, thinly veiled with innuendo, jolted Sarah. This was no longer mere inappropriate flattery, it was a clear crossing of boundaries. Pulling her hand back, she took a step away, her eyes meeting his. "Mr. Daniels, I think it's best if we keep our relationship professional. I'm not comfortable with this," she stated, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. Mr. Daniels paused, his smile faltering, then forced a laugh. "Of course, Sarah, I meant no offence, just a little compliment between colleagues," he said, the ease in his voice sounding rehearsed. As he left the kitchen, Sarah's relief was tinged with a deep unease. The betrayal of trust was palpable, leaving her feeling vulnerable in her own sanctuary. The thought of telling Tom loomed in her mind, heavy with potential consequences. Could she risk her husband's job, their financial security, over what some might dismiss as harmless flirting? The weight of her decision pressed down on her, a burden she wasn't sure how to navigate. After the unsettling encounter in the kitchen, Sarah's resolve stiffened. The next day, with the heavy decision pressing on her mind, she decided it was time to address the issue directly with Mr. Daniels. She requested a meeting with him under the guise of discussing upcoming restaurant events, knowing well that this conversation would steer into far more personal territory. When Mr. Daniels walked into the meeting room, he greeted Sarah with his usual charismatic smile, seemingly oblivious to the tension he had instigated. "Sarah, always a pleasure. What culinary delights are we planning today?" he asked, his tone light and expectant. Sarah, however, was not swayed by his charm this time. "Mr. Daniels, before we discuss any events, we need to talk about last night," she began, her voice steady but firm. "The way you behaved towards me was not acceptable. I am here to work, not to entertain personal advances." Mr. Daniels' smile faltered, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before his expression smoothed into one of mild amusement. "Sarah, I think you're misreading my friendliness for something more. We were just talking and I was complimenting your skills. You're taking this too seriously, he replied, his tone dismissive, attempting to downplay the gravity of his actions. Sarah felt a surge of frustration at his response. It was the reaction she had feared but also expected. No, I don't think I am. There is a line between being friendly and inappropriate, and you crossed that line. It's not the first time either. I've ignored it before, but I can't let it go anymore, she insisted, her words clear and concise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. Mr. Daniels leaned back, his demeanour shifting as he realised Sarah was not going to be swayed by his casual dismissal. Sarah, let's not turn this into a big issue. I assure you, my intentions were benign. Let's just move past this for the sake of the restaurant and your husband's career, he suggested, subtly reminding her of the potential consequences of pushing the matter further. The mention of Tom made Sarah's heart sink. She knew that her actions could impact not just her, but her husband as well. Yet the thought of letting Mr. Daniels's behaviour slide made her feel complicit in her own discomfort. It was a moment of truth for Sarah, a test of her principles against the practicalities of her life and her husband's job. She took a deep breath, her mind racing with the potential fallout, but steadied by her resolve. I can't do that, Mr. Daniels. What you consider benign has made me uncomfortable in my workplace, and that's not acceptable. I need to know this won't happen again, she stated, her voice imbued with a quiet strength. Mr. Daniels studied her, for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he gauged her determination. Finally he nodded slowly, the businesslike mask returning. Very well, Sarah, it won't happen again. Let's focus on the restaurant, shall we? He conceded, his tone now clipped and professional. As Sarah left the room, the weight of the confrontation lingered with her. She knew she had made the right decision, but the path forward was uncertain. The meeting had not only changed the dynamics of her professional relationship with Mr. Daniels, but also marked a significant moment in her personal journey of standing up for her dignity and values. The conversation with Tom still awaited her, a daunting prospect, yet she felt empowered, knowing she had taken a stand. Empowered by her recent confrontation with Mr. Daniels, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in her interactions with her colleagues, especially the female staff. One evening, while sharing a late coffee break with a few of them after a long shift, the conversation naturally drifted towards work dynamics and management. Encouraged by Sarah's own experiences, Laura, a relatively new server, hesitantly shared a troubling encounter she had with Mr. Daniels. It was startlingly similar to what Sarah had faced. As Laura spoke, another cook, Jenna, chimed in with her own story, which she had brushed off as an awkward interaction until now. The pattern was unmistakable and deeply troubling. It became clear that what Sarah had dismissed as isolated incidents were part of a broader, more systemic issue. Mr. Daniels had been making many of the women uncomfortable, and his behaviour had gone unchecked because everyone feared the repercussions of speaking out. The realisation that she was not alone brought both relief and a surge of responsibility to Sarah. It wasn't just about her anymore. The safety and well-being of her colleagues were also at stake. They looked to her not just as a senior member of the kitchen staff, but as someone who had dared to voice her discontent. The discussions became more frequent and open among the staff. As the women shared their stories, they found strength in their numbers and a resolve to bring about change. They decided to gather statements from everyone who had experienced or witnessed inappropriate behaviour by Mr. Daniels and planned to present it to the restaurant's management collectively. The day they delivered the compiled testimonies was charged with a tense energy. Sarah led the group, her resolve firm, yet her hands shook slightly as she held the documents. They were not just accusing a powerful man of misconduct, they were challenging the culture of silence that had allowed it to persist. Management's reaction was cautious, yet serious. They promised a thorough investigation, and the news quickly spread through the restaurant. The fallout was immediate and intense. Some colleagues were supportive, rallying behind the women for their courage. Others were sceptical, wary of the implications such accusations might have on their work environment and their positions. Tom's reaction was of particular concern to Sarah. When she finally told him everything from her personal encounters with Mr. Daniels to the collective action she had taken, the news hit him hard. He was shocked, not just by what his boss had done, but by the magnitude of the situation and the risk Sarah had taken. He felt a complex mix of pride and fear. Pride for her bravery and fear for the potential repercussions on their lives. In the following days, the restaurant was rife with whispered conversations and speculative glances. Mr. Daniels was asked to take an administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. The workplace felt different. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing both the good and the bad underneath. Sarah felt a profound shift within herself as well. She had stood up, not just for herself, but for others, and no matter the outcome, she had ignited a change. There was no going back to the way things were. This was a new beginning, one marked by a collective resolve to foster a safer, more respectful work environment. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew she wasn't walking it alone. The weeks following the investigation were a whirlwind. The restaurant's management conducted their inquiries with a discretion that bordered on secretive, yet the undercurrents were felt by everyone. When the decision finally came down, Mr. Daniels was quietly dismissed. The relief among the staff was palpable, yet the victory was bittersweet. The restaurant had lost some of its luster, the scandal leaving a stain that no amount of professional cleaning could wipe away. For Sarah, the outcome was both vindicating and life-altering. The incident had exposed her to the darker underbellies of power dynamics and personal integrity within the workplace. It had also lit a fire within her, a desire to take control of her professional life in a way she had never considered before. Tom's reaction to the entire ordeal was mixed. Initially shocked and worried, he gradually moved to a space of deep respect and admiration for Sarah's courage. His support became a bedrock for her as she navigated her next steps. Their relationship, tested by the strain of the situation, grew stronger. Their bond deepened by the trials they had faced together. Emboldened by her experience and the support from her peers, Sarah made the bold decision to leave the restaurant. She had long harboured dreams of starting her own catering business, a dream that the recent events had pushed to the forefront. Her vision was clear: a business grounded in respect, equality, and passion for the culinary arts, a stark contrast to the environment she had left. Launching the business was no small feat. There were days of doubt where the safety of a regular paycheck seemed tempting, but every time she wavered, she remembered the faces of her former colleagues, the women who had stood by her, and the resolve in their eyes. They had sparked a change, not just in policy, but in the very fabric of their industry's culture. Community response was overwhelmingly positive. News of her initiative spread, bolstered by local support for her bravery and entrepreneurship. Other women in the industry reached out, sharing their stories and expressing their hopes for a new kind of culinary environment, one that Sarah was now pioneering. As her business grew, so did her sense of fulfillment. She wasn't just building a company, she was crafting a legacy of resilience and empowerment. The kitchen, once a place of conflict, had now become a sanctuary again, but this time on her own terms. Her team was diverse, passionate, and above all, supportive of one another, reflecting the values Sarah held dear. Reflecting on her journey, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. She had turned one of the most challenging periods of her life into an opportunity for growth and change. The lessons she had learned about integrity, bravery, and personal growth were now pillars of her new venture. Looking ahead, Sarah was filled with hope. She had rediscovered her love for culinary arts in a way that resonated not just with her palate, but also with her heart. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but it brimmed with possibilities. With her hand at the helm of her own business, she was ready to face whatever challenges came next, knowing that the hardest battles often lead to the greatest triumphs.